So we are now recording. We'll get started. How did you get into rifle? I saw that you started as a freshman in high school. Is that
Yeah.
a common trajectory? Is that late in the game?
Um, so depends on where in the country it is. So shooting is one of those weird sports that doesn't really have a good centralized body where it's like, oh, it's standard for kids to get involved with soccer or football at like 7, 8, 9 years old. Like the 4-H programs have shooting programs, whether it's like BB gun or sporter or different flavors of stuff. And so my dad was in the Marine Corps for 30 years, and we were coming back stateside from a year in Norway, and we ended up in Virginia. And my high school was a part of the Potomac League, which had about a dozen or so rifle teams. And this is like one of the few places in the country that actually has an organized like high school league. And so my experience is a little bit different than most, because I did have the opportunity like to compete for my high school against other high schools in that Northern Virginia area. But typically that's not really the case. So on average, most kids are starting around like maybe like 10, 11 years old. But the the good thing about shooting is that it's one of those skill-based sports where people can kind of jump in at whatever age, whether it's like early on or mid 30s to older, and they can learn develop as such. So I started freshman year. That's usually when kids start getting serious about the Olympic stuff, and so I guess kind of where I put in was maybe a little bit late, but not too late.
So I saw that you started as a freshman in high school, and a year later, you're already going to the National Junior Olympic Shooting Championship.
Yeah,
Say that's a pretty quick, hey, I'm good at this meter.
it it was kind of a weird transition because at the time, shooting the dynamic of the world and or the country, I guess, there wasn't too many shooters coming out of our area, and so there might have been like two or three other athletes from other clubs going, and so it was a pretty big deal. We're like, oh man, like I made the junior Olympic, competition, and at that point, my entire world was around Northern Virginia, all the high school teams. And next thing I know, I'm looking at World Cups, ISSF stuff, like getting exposed to all those things. I didn't make any teams until about 4 years later, but that was definitely my first experience seeing like college shooters, finals, and seeing like the bigger world of the shooting sports.
When you were competing against those college students, were you looking at being recruited? I mean, how did the recruitment to NC State move forward, especially because you got kind of into the sport late?
Yeah. So I think as far as like the recruiting aspect goes, so like different Division 1 sports have different rules as far as like how they recruit. And so for rifle, you're not allowed to even communicate with these schools until your junior year. And so going into Junior Olympics my sophomore year, that definitely started the conversation. And so I started emailing schools and looking into things that I wanted to do. And NC State came into the picture that fall where I shot a local match in Virginia. And at that point, I kind of was aware of like some of these programs, what they're meaning, and I didn't really think about NC State because it wasn't one of the top tier programs, but it also wasn't the worst. It was very middle ground. And it's like, well, it's a big school. It's got everything that anybody could really ever need, and so that kind of kicked the ball a little bit and got things rolling. And at that time, I was looking at a couple service academies, which ended up not working out. And that kind of led me in that direction. But that first Junior Olympics was kind of like that what do you call it? The paradigm shift was like, oh, there's a bigger world of shooting. There's you know colleges and there's real support and all of this stuff where it's like my parents were really good about helping me out and giving me what I needed, but then there's another echelon of support up there that could be earned, and so that was that became like a reward that I wanted to earn, and so that first Junior Olympics kind of set that pitch that inception, and then all of a sudden the idea took fruition in my junior year, and then senior year I was going off to signing and going off to school that later that summer.
Was the Nova competition competitive enough for you? I mean, what is the environment of rifle in that area of the country?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty competitive. And I think the cool thing about the Nova area is there's all sorts of disciplines that all the same kids shoot, so they're competing against each other in different ways. And so from during my time when I was there was like anywhere between 3 to 5 of the Robinson kids. That was the school that I went to, and then there was like 2 to 3 other strong athletes from different programs and different schools. And then there was another club called the Acorns who competed at different matches outside of the league, and we got to compete against them as a high school. And I mean, it was competitive. We didn't really look beyond the social sphere of the Nova area, where now I feel like a lot of kids are very connected with the broader country as far as like who they caught to and what their friend groups are. But with the Nova area, it was kind of like a cesspool. It's like everything was just so competitive all the time. No, seriously, it's like there was a 2 to 3 matches a week kind of thing. Like we're getting off school at 3, and then we're putting rounds on range at 5, and it was always very competitive. There's a few times we went up to like Palmyra, and we went out to like Ohio to do some matches, but the Nova stuff kept us super consumed, and it continues to be one of like the heavily recruited areas in the country. Not necessarily like one program or the other, but it's like just that area, that spot is like a pretty good big hotbed. It's kind of like Texas with football in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it your sport is so niche down that I feel like even geographically, I mean, I went to WVU, so I kind of understand the small world that is,
Yeah,
I mean, rifle at a collegiate level. Um, and then through this podcast, I have actually interviewed a fair amount of Team USA. I actually had Mary Tucker on last year on an episode,
good.
and
Yeah.
I mean, she's incredible. And we will go through your Olympic experience. It was so funny though when I was doing my research on you. I was looking at your Tokyo experience and I pulled up your mixed air rifle picture with Mary, and I'm like, this is such a small world. And I'm like, now I have two of two, you know? It's like I was surprised at how tight-knit the rifle kind of industry is at the collegiate level. Did you
Yeah.
see that when you were being recruited? I mean, were you seeing
I
the
did
same group of kids?
I did not. It wasn't until I actually got to college that it's like, okay, um, I guess like some layer of kids kind of fell off because of high school stuff or whatever. But then it's like, oh, there's the collegiate kids, and then those collegiate kids got involved with CMP, or my peer group in college is now, turning into the collegiate coaches in the country. And so that's it is very tight knit. And I think because for the sport, it's all offense. There's no defense. You can't defend yourself against another competitor. So if they just shoot better, they shoot better. And it's like there's nothing that you can do to stop somebody else from winning except doing better than they are. And so I think that like takes a lot of like the hostility out compared to other sports where it's like they're always eyeing each other up or whatever. And so I think that's kind of where the social norms are a little bit different for us than it is for other sports. And I've seen that as I gotten older, where it's like, yeah, it's like, kids from other schools are friends with each other all the time because that's just kind of what they do.
Yeah, I mean, I've honestly never thought of individual sports in that context. I mean, other than rifle, what sports operate like that? Swimming, I guess, is one of them.
Yeah, I guess swimming, maybe golf, maybe
Oh,
like
yeah.
bowling, track and field, probably in all events, honestly, but not like team sports like handball, football, soccer, baseball. It's
Right.
like there's always tactics to upend the other team, and it's like I feel
Yeah.
like that gives a little bit of a layer of animosity that just doesn't exist in some of these other Olympic sports.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like just the that in itself creates a tighter knit group because you're not competing against, like, I guess in offense defensive terms, you are the only one who's in control of how you end up doing.
Yeah, pretty much.
So when you got to college, were you accepted? I mean, we're about to talk about the NC State implosion of your program. Um,
Yeah.
I was looking for your college stats, but they have wiped the NC State athletics website of all your rosters, all your stats, all your schedules. I mean, the links don't even work anymore.
Yeah.
What was your college career like? I saw that you had been quoted in a Yahoo Sports article as saying that you were promised in an on-campus range in 2013 and it never happened.
Correct. Yeah. Actually, let me do a timeout real quick
Yeah,
because I've got like super bad allergies. I'm gonna
yeah,
go blow my nose real quick.
yeah, you're good. Hello, welcome back.
Yeah. Yeah. So the range thing was always kind of like a sore subject with everybody because so I was promised a range on my like I guess my official visit. I didn't even get
Yeah.
an official visit. It was just an unofficial that we drove down for. And we met with the team, met with the coaches at the time, and got to talk to the athletic director and meet with some people, the advisor, the whole thing. Um, and that was back in like 2012 when we first kind of made that contact. And I enrolled fall of 2013 and graduated in spring of 17. And at no point had there been progress on a range except we relocated from Reynolds Coliseum in the basement to Broughton Hall, which was definitely an upgrade because we got a team room, we've got like air conditioning. We had access to like the middle of campus. Yeah, our conditions were not good when it came to the actual like sport training for the rifle team. Um, and so that was a hurdle for everybody before me and after me to kind of make ends meet with their performance because it's like expecting the football team to compete without a strength and conditioning room. It's like it was kind of outrageous and the people who were successful at that program were typically the ones who understood that it had to take like above and beyond and cutting corners and doing different things on their own just to be successful. And so there was a handful of us that did things, whether it was like making some teams or going on some trips or just performing in finals nationally. And so that's kind of where that ended up, I guess.
I saw that you were the Wolfpack's first All-American since 1975. How did you
Yeah.
separate yourself from, I mean, how did you get what you needed out of that program?
So well, let me give a lot of context to this because I feel like as we dive into the broader meaning of the podcast, it's all going to come up anyways. And so like my summer um before my junior year, so summer of 15, came off a season that just wasn't that great. Grades weren't all that good. I was switching majors to sport management. And so I was kind of facing kind of I guess a realignment of expectations anyways. And had a pretty big scare with some skincare stuff. Had a bunch of moles removed. Spent about 6 weeks with stitches in. It was not a good time. And so um, in my mind, I had wrapped myself around like, oh, I'm going to work harder. I'm going to be smarter about all this stuff. Like I'm just going to do things, and I couldn't because of this operation. And so I ended up studying sport management, which led into this like from Laney Basham. They have this whole little web series and they used to have these videos up online. And I don't even know if you can even buy them anymore, but um, I watched those, I studied them, and I like applied myself and like looked at things and was like, okay, what do these look like? What does that look like? And when I got back to NC State, we had moved away from Reynolds to Broughton, so there's kind of like this clean slate per se. And I got together with the coaches, Keith Miller and Jennifer Marshall, um, at that who are the coaching staff at the time, and kind of said like, hey, like this is what I want to accomplish this year. Like it dawned on me that I'm halfway through my college career, and I went to one World Championships, and I'm not satisfied with what I'm doing. And so they were very supportive. Um they challenged me on a lot of the things that I was saying and like conceptually like trying to make that work. And so over the course of the next couple of weeks leading into the first match, I formulated this like plan to be successful. And at the very first match, that did not go according to plan like at all. The cool thing about that though was when I did shoot this first match of VMI, it didn't feel bad. Like I didn't shoot great, but it felt like the solutions were obvious afterwards. And there was like a level of understanding, like, hey, I made a lot of mistakes. I just need to not make mistakes as much and just do better. And that was kind of what led into the next couple of weeks of training. We had a sports site come in. We did a training camp with the other range we would go to. So we'd shoot air gun on campus, small bore away from campus. And so we're heading into the Naval Academy, and two really cool things happened. One, I broke 2 out of the 3 records, and I set a personal best in small bore. And so I just did all this stuff like, oh man, like this is super cool. The second thing was everyone around me was doing the same thing. And so we kind of had this shift in the program where it's like, hey, we barely ever broke 4,600. And then we just crushed all of our program records in small bore air gun in total. And we beat Navy. We haven't beaten a GARC team in years. And we beat them by 20 something points, like handedly. And and so that's kind of when we saw this shift of dialogue and mentality and teamwork for the kind of like for the next year or so. And so that's kind of where it's like, you know, when people are like, oh, you didn't never really had a range or um you know, didn't really have all the resources. Like, well, yeah, but I did have a lot of people who were gonna help me kind of make ends meet in a way and challenge me to keep me on course. And that's kind of how that worked out. And so when we got to the end of the school year, I hadn't really put 2 and 2 together that I was going to be an All-American until after the fact, where it's like, oh, what does this mean? It's like, yeah, you're on first, second team for, you know, whichever guns and the total aggregate. I'm like, oh. And then it's like started looking at the scores, like, oh, I'm like the top third in the country. And then for the GARC, it's like I was not shoot of the year, but I was on the first GARC team in all the disciplines, like the second or third ranked in both guns kind of thing. And so that was kind of like an eye-opening experience at the end of it, where it's like, hey, I changed my perspective a year ago and I saw it kind of work out. And when I stood there with all the awards was when it kind of dawned on me, like, oh, I made an actual substantial change that worked, kind of thing.
Yeah. When I was talking to Mary on her episode, she is, I mean, you're very well aware, she is meticulous.
Mm.
Do you think that in order to be successful at rifle, you have to be unbelievably detail oriented?
Um, I think in the broadest of terms, yes. There are outliers of people who kind of do whatever. Um, and so I think there's like a pretty set um, social norms of fundamentals. Like you always got to do these things to be successful. You got to pull the trigger. You got to point at the target. You know, it's like that has to happen. But as I've kind of explored all these different nations and like what they do versus kind of like what we do, and the American system is totally messed up because everyone from around the country does different stuff, and so we widely have a range of talent and philosophy. And I do think like the detail oriented people, um, you know, they have a level of success on one end. And I think as far as like the polar opposites, there's kind of like the athletic people who just understand how to align sights and pull triggers well. Where it's like, okay, you set up fundamentally good positions, not necessarily the best, but at a certain point they're not really needing anything beyond their skill. And so I think that's kind of where we see people kind of jump in and take glory from others. Where it's like, oh, this person squeezed into the final NCAA's or at Olympic trials, and it's like, oh, they're actually like competing at a high class level, but they look terrible. Their positions look terrible, and it's like, well, they don't really. The opposite side of that is just that athletic, like, oh, I'm just looking at the end of the gun and I'm executing and I'm letting the shots go down range because it's in the fourth quarter and we have to score kind of deal. And and sometimes one person can be both those people where they're super detail oriented in training, and then when it's go time, they're ready to achieve some goals. And so as far as like the behaviors emitted from these people, it's like I see a lot of my peers who are super detail oriented, and then I'm more of the opposite, where it's like, hey, I got to do these 5 or 6 things to be prepared. Go for it. And I see a fair number of people who do that as well.
Walk me through your pre-shoot routine.
Um, so I guess my pre-match routine kind of addresses a couple things. First is physical. I have a warm up. I do the warm up about an hour before the match, and the timing of the warm up, it's always after a meal, breakfast, or depending on the time of day, the lunch or whatever. Um, I take this beet juice supplement that helps dilate blood vessels to help things kind of flow through as a pre-workout, and so I take that around the same time as my meal. And so as we're heading into before the match starts, I make sure that there's tangibles like ammunition, the gun set up right. Um, I'm where I need to be, on time or at the right area. And then there's something called call the line. So I have all my equipment, I go up and I set things down. And at that time, at call to the line, that's kind of when I shift my headspace into, it's like, okay, my head's looking down range. I'm paying attention to the wind if we're shooting outside, or if we're shooting air gun. It's like, the only interesting thing that's going to be going on is downrange. So the social norm for the United States is to kind of keep things really quiet, kind of like golf. But overseas, people don't really care, so they're just talking, they're just doing stuff, they're knocking things over. Sometimes like we'll just hear laughter and whatever's going on, and we um kind of devise in my head. It's like I'm kind of a busy bee. I'm like all over the place. But when it comes to that call to line time, it's like that 15 minutes before ciders, like, yep, my head's looking down range. And that is all that I'm accomplishing um, between now and the end of the match. When we get to ciders, I usually have like a very quick snack at the beginning. It's like a Cliff Bar energy chew that marathon runners would typically use, or like endurance athletes. The DRI is like 3, and I take 1 because I'm just standing there. And I'm going. At that point, I'm shooting. I'm trying to get to the middle of the target as possible, looking at fundamentals, finding out like where my MPA is. And then in the last 5 minutes of ciders, I'm trying to be as deep as possible, where it's like, okay, 10-5, 10-6, 7, and above, counting those, doing it on purpose, being deliberate. And then when ciders are done, I take about 5 to 10 dry fires before I put my first record shot down range, and then we're going. For small bore, um, it's a little bit pretty much the same thing, except there's an asterisk there where at any time, if I have to get up, I should, because in the kneeling position, like we'll kind of like sit on our leg, then it'll get numb, and so you'll feel a pulse, and so there's a kind of another layer to manage, but that's fine. And then there's the wind as well, and so if like the wind flags are blowing this way, and then ciders end, it's almost every time. It doesn't really matter. It's like just like Murphy's law. It's like oop boop. Now they switch the other way, and so it's like not necessarily doing a little bit of math, but trying to calculate in my head. It's like, okay, where was my last zero? The wind is now blowing in the opposite direction, making my best judgment on what I'm seeing downrange, and then having that open expectation moving forward. And then that's pretty much the pre-match routine that leads into the match routine.
Yeah. What is the time frame between recorded shots for you, and what do you do in that time frame?
Um, I'm usually putting a round down range every maybe like 45 seconds to a minute. It just depends. Um, and so I have a breathing rhythm. I stick to that rhythm and I'm aware of like how that feels with my heart rate. And if I have to operate outside of that, that typically has to do with if I feel different, like if my blood pressure is changing or, I'm either de-escalated or overly stimulated kind of thing. And I'm trying to bring myself to this mid-range of activation. And usually like my shot process will start with loading the pellet, closing the bolt, or, loading the bullet in there. And at that point, I start my breathing rhythm and I'm looking around the range at different cue points. If it's outdoors, I'm looking at the wind flags. That's like the only thing to really look at besides the target. For air gun, I'm cueing myself with words around the room. So like at the OTC, we have a bunch of banners of sponsors and stuff. I'll just read those, and then once my head goes over over my sights, then I will align the sights onto the target conceptually, and I'll drop my head down on the sight, and at that point I am like good to go, and I move on with my the rest of my shot process. So I approach onto the target, and if there's like weird squiggles with the movement or whatever, then I'll abandon it and try again, or I'll just commit to it and then just send the bullet or pellet down range as I see fit. Um, and like a good like 98% of the time, it's what I want. But if I see any of those cues pop up and I decide to take the shot, that statistic just plummets. And so there's a little bit of awareness where it's like, okay, I have the discipline to do these things. If it's not that way, don't do it because you're just not going to have that high success rate. But if it does work out, great. And then I, shoot the gun, fall through, put the gun down, and like the water cycle, it's like it starts again. So I, close it, move on, and just focus on the next shot.
Yeah, I mean, I've never spoken to an athlete in a sport where the timing is solely yours. And I think that that's what's so interesting about the mental side of rifle because you can take however long it takes. These are hours and hours at meets to get as perfect a score as you possibly can.
Yeah.
How do you not fall into a perfectionist mindset?
Um, I think for me personally, because I'm not a perfectionist, it's super easy for me to just avoid it completely. And so a lot of my peers will sit and like train and do stuff or whatever, and I'm like the opposite. It's like, oh, I hit the threshold. That is great. I'm just going to do that for a very long time. I love statistics. It's like one of the two math courses in college that I really had fun with because that's when during that time at NC State, I started looking into like we have this program called SCAD, which will help read the hold and give us more information, the speeds and timing and score and whatever. And I really started to dig into that, and I started to just blow up data and be like, oh, like I don't necessarily need to have a hole that's not moving. I just needed to be slow enough to where the bullet's always going to be bigger than the area that I'm aiming at. And next thing I know, I started seeing more success because I lowered my expectations, which seems kind of dumb, but in from my perspective, I'm looking for a range of performance to operate in, not necessarily to be the top echelon. The top echelon, I think, is an a bad expectation to have when you end up in a position to succeed. And so, from my perspective, I've looked at a lot of peers who get to World Cup finals and they just can't perform. And it's like, well, what happens? Like, well, I couldn't run my process. I couldn't run my position felt bad or whatever. And then there's other Europeans or Asians, whoever, who are in these finals, and I asked them like, well, what happened? And they're like, well, it's like I just had to change the plan. The plan doesn't work under stress. And so that's kind of where I identify with a little bit more is this flexibility because I understand like where my base skill level is, but not necessarily so rigid that I have to apply it every time, because I think the difference between like my layer of success versus others is just purely based on opportunistic decisions, where it's like, hey, I'm going to sit here and breathe through the next 5 minutes because I have the time to do that. And then I look at my peers who are still shooting the match, and I see them very frustrated as we're losing opportunities, because once the shot's gone, it's gone. And if you shoot a 9, or if you're shooting air gun, you shoot like a scratch 10, you're not gaining momentum on the score. And so that's kind of where in my head I've conceptualized this, where it's like, I'm okay with this layer of flexibility, because if I'm so rigid, then what's my backup plan if I have to make this other thing work? It's like, yeah, that's kind of where my head is.
Yeah. I love bringing athletes on who break down the sport the way that you do and the way that Mary did. I think that it's easy to interview 15 football players and get basically the same answer. But there's something about interviewing individual sport athletes that I just think is fascinating. I love the way that you guys process, and I think it's so cool to have someone like you on. I'm really excited to get to tell your story. Moving forward, was it always air rifle? I mean, I know that you talked about small bore as well, but did you know that air rifle was going to be the way to get you to the Olympics?
No, I thought it was going to be the opposite. Because my first success, nationally and internationally, was in small bore, where I started making teams. I went to world championships in small bore. And my performance level in the NCAA was better in small bore as well. I think the shift came when I went to Olympic trials, and I shot okay. Like, there was nothing really outstanding. I made one final the first day, and then I was in ninth the next 2 days. And I kind of sat there and like watched everything, and it's like, okay, I was not prepared to deal with the Olympic trials in May or April of that year. Um, and so that perspective shift kind of started to move me into um, a different perspective for airgun. I definitely, at the time, it wasn't like my fondest thing, but I knew with the equipment, with the setup that I had, that I could be successful with it. And I did just spend a fall and a spring being a good air gunner. And I went overseas to airgun in between two championships and made finals in both of them. And then I won the Cirque championship the year it folded. So that was kind of cool. It's like, hey, I'm the last champion, you know? And so, kind of leading into Olympic trials, my goal wasn't necessarily, I think like the goal was to make the Olympic team. Like, I've read over my notes, and it's like, well, I wrote that down, but I never really felt like that was really the mission. The mission, I think, on my end, was to prove something. The pay value was to be like, hey, NC State's a viable option. I'm gonna go and be successful for them. And that was kind of the MO for the entire year. And as I led into Olympic trials, it's like I have literally nothing to lose. I go back to work on Monday at my internship, and if I make the team, then we'll pivot. But if not, I've got a plan. So to be honest, it's like, let's see what happens. And after the first day, I was in the lead by a substantial margin. I just did not give that up. By the time I made the team, I statistically didn't even need to shoot the final to be on the team. And so that was kind of where my my success in airgun really began, was at Olympic trials, where I was the only person to make finals all 3 days. And with the finals, you get points added to your score. And I added a lot of points, almost 20, um, just to push me way above and beyond everyone else. Um, and that was kind of done through just composure and just not even like a strict plan. It's like, okay, here's like the 7 things I'm going to accomplish this week, and that's it. And we're just going to keep our nose downrange, and we're just going to do the things we need to do, etc.
Wow. What was the process of going to the Olympics while you were still in college like? I mean,
Um,
it's such a unique experience at any point in your life, let alone in the middle of college. You were what, your junior year?
yeah, so I was going into my junior year. I was still, um, well, I was going into my senior year when I made the Olympic team. Sorry, and I had to defer my internship to the fall of that year, and because I had so many classes and other stuff going on, I didn't start school when I was at the games, but I did leave basically the day after my event to go home and to just take care of school and life and whatnot. So my family came down, my girlfriend came down, my college coach came down. We got to, I got to shoot my match. It was okay. It's 22nd place or 21st place. And we kind of like high-fived about it. It was like, hey, this is a good experience, and we're gonna kind of figure out what the next part is. And in my mind, it was like, okay, I am now pursuing Tokyo. Let's go home and get started. And we pretty much rolled right on into the season and the academics and all that other kind of stuff. And it was difficult because I think I conceptually understood what I was getting myself into, but then when I was actually standing there, feeling the pain in my feet from just everything going on, it's like, yep, nope, like this is a hard thing that I have to accomplish, and it is what it is.
I think that the Olympics is such an interesting structure because you compete and then there are 4 years of lead up until you compete next. But those 4 years are spent with trainings, and obviously you're going all over the country and all over the world. What did the 4 years between Rio and Tokyo look like for you?
Um, a lot of life stuff. Um, and I say that because I feel like a lot of my peers will just say like, oh, I worked really hard, did all these things or whatever. But it's like, yeah, it's like I did too, but just stuff happened. We I got around to graduating my senior year, and my girlfriend and I looked at each other and about halfway through the school year, like, well, what are we gonna do? Like, what is the plan for us? And we didn't really have a plan. The resident athlete program out here in Colorado Springs became an option, and we started to talk about that. Like, hey, this is something I could do. Do we want to just take a chance and move out here together? And so through this entire mess of my senior year, like it went well, but there's all the life stuff kind of dealing with like the senioritis and all of that kind of stuff. And we graduate we graduated on the same day. She went to a school in North Virginia, and I went um, to NC State, and so we didn't get a chance to see each other. And then 2 days later, I had gotten onto a plane. I went to Germany and to Munich to shoot a World Cup, and then I flew straight back to Raleigh. And 24 hours later, I was packing my car up to move out of my townhouse up to her house, where my dad met us, and we got a trailer from the airport. And oh, he also had a broken ankle during the time, and he came out. We packed a trailer full of my stuff and her stuff, uh, hooked up to my car, and then we drove across the country. 2 days later, we saw some family on the way, and 3 days later, we met up with my mom and spent I made maybe like 4 days, I think, at most, looking for an apartment or a house or something just to rent. And we settled on this apartment that was kind of lucky because it was like the second place we looked at the beginning of this whole search. We went all around town, and we called them, was like, hey, is this unit still open? Like, no, but we have this other unit that's actually better. It's on ground level, and it's got a 2-car garage attached to it. And we're like, go. As we drove over there, we looked at everything, and it's like, oh wow, like awesome. So now we're living together, and we're on our own for the first time. We both get jobs. I'm working with the resident program, doing stuff, and I qualify for a couple different teams. And leading into December of 2017, the resident program was cut, and a bunch of people lost support, including me. And so that kind of gave me a wake up call of like, oh, like I am now doing this on my own. It's like I feel like a lot of people don't really recognize that the quads, the 4 year cycle lifespan of the Olympics and the support that's given is exactly 4 years, if not a little bit longer or shorter. And I was kind of not relying, I didn't know I was relying on it until um, after that happened. So starting in 2018, it's like all of a sudden there's no healthcare, there's no, no stipend. I was making a little bit of money, now I'm making no money. And so I started a business called Team Winning Solutions. And so that the entire adventure of that was meant to be coaching, help kids out, do some personal training, make money to live, and we're going to go off and accomplish some stuff. And so that went on, that is still going on. I love doing it. It's my primary source of income and like my main thing I do now. But at the time, that was like, okay, this is like a temporary thing to kind of get me through whatever we're going to do. A year later, my wife and I got married, and that was really exciting. Shot a bunch of matches, and I kind of had a come to Jesus moment at the end of 2018, because it's like, okay, we're halfway through this quad now, and I haven't really accomplished anything like outstanding. Like I've done some stuff. I was national champion in a few things, but no international success, no finals berth, nothing. And it's like, okay, I made another kind of perspective shift. My winter air gun that year was not that great, and so that's kind of where I drew a line in the sand and said, okay, I'm going to do better. I'm going to change my perspective and try leaning into my resources, and things improved. I went to China for my first World Cup of the year in April, and I shot a personal best overseas. And so that was kind of like an inkling of like, hey, I could do better and do this overseas and be successful. And then later that summer, I had the Pan American Championships where I shot airgun in, and that was a mess because uh, I had a kidney infection. I ended up in the hospital leading into the competition, and it's like went there. The USOPC took care of me. It was great, and not great, but they helped. And 2 days later, I'm on the line shooting the match. My gun's breaking on me. I'm using borrowed equipment. That was a mess. Making it to the final, coach and I fixed the gun. We get in there, and it's like at that point, I find myself in a similar position that I did in college, where it's like I have nothing to lose. I'm going for it. Like there's not there. I will. My life will not change whether I win or lose. Therefore, I have nothing to lose. And so the objective at that point was like, okay, primary objective, survive. The secondary objective, win Pan American Games or at least get a quota. And I did all three of those things, thank God. And that was kind of like another thing of like, okay, like I know I have a foundation of success to build on, and I know I can be successful, and I'm going to be successful. And that was definitely very ego boosting, whatever. Like it was great. Go home. During that entire time span, like I've been dealing with high blood pressure issues on my own for like at this point 3 years. And the USPC, with all that removal of support or whatever 2 years earlier, saw me almost keel over at Pan Am's, and it's like, whoa, like we didn't know any about this or about any of this stuff. Like, yeah, right. I don't have support. Like I didn't have that kind of support back then. Well, then now I had it because I won the Pan American Games, and having some of these professionals come in and just take care of me was great. And so really started to address some physical issues. Um, I had the opportunity to go train with multi-medalist Matt Emmons. He's like, from my perspective, he's kind of the athlete that I would strive to be. Super successful, super deliberate, just a mean competitor. He was kind of played with a lot of like ups and downs and turbulence. I mean, he survived cancer, and he survived um, the turbulences of the Olympics itself. He made a lot of mistakes there, but he ended up walking away with 3 medals. And so from my perspective, like that's the guy. Like if there's anybody that understands just how to either deal with something or technically understand anything or have the experience to say like, yeah, that's a waste of time, it's that guy. Because I got to go over there and train with him. Super great experience. On the way back, through misfortune, I lost my not lost. I got my guns confiscated in New Jersey, and we had to go through this whole cycle of stuff just to get it back. And we were leading the small bore trials. I used somebody else's backup gun, and that ended up just being just not meant to be. The piece of the equipment broke leading into the match, and it's like I'm screwed. I'm not going to shoot 3P in the Olympics. That's just how it is. And so now I'm left with just air gun, and I had a lot of success there. And I knew one of my fears was like losing that support again, but I knew that I was going to have it. And so that allowed me to continue to focus and to perform with airgun. And my whole goal is like, okay, it's like I'm gonna go above and beyond with this. Like I'm going to make the Olympic team. Like that's my goal. That's what I decided to do. And literally every final between October of 19 all the way through Olympic trials, I won. I was usually one of the top two people with qualification scores, and I set a national record the last day of Olympic trials. Um, and that was a great experience for me, and like affirming like I'm doing all this work, I'm getting all the things I need out of it, and it's working out. Um, Now I just need to continue to maintain. Well, we couldn't maintain because COVID hit, and so the Olympics was delayed a year, and so it's like, okay, so how do I keep my mind engaged with shooting if I can't go to the range? That's where this TWS thing really blew up because I had a dozen kids on the team at the time. Um, well, at the time, it wasn't really a team. It was just like a group of kids I worked with, individually. And I emailed them and said, like, hey, we are faced with, pandemonium. Like, it's been 2 weeks. We're not going back anytime soon. Like, that much is clear. What do we want to do? And they all said, like, we want to continue to train. We want to do stuff. And so we set up this pretty aggressive schedule of like 4 to 5 days a week for an hour at least. We're doing like online shooting drills. We're looking at discussion groups, just them coming on and hanging out. We did a lot of stuff. And with that different approach and that model, I moved from training just 12 athletes to about 20. And so I was able to kind of reach a broader group. And so my passion kind of changed a little bit where it's like, hey, like I'm working with these people to survive. And now it's like I have the chance to impact their lives forever through my lessons and through my experiences on these things. And that was great because that gave me a level of passion to continue to perform and do all these things between that COVID time and the Olympics. Um, First World Cup was in March of 2021. And at this point, it's the year after Olympic trials. I was like, okay, I need to come out here and swing. And I've been training, I've been getting a lot of stuff done and accomplished. First World Cup qualified in seventh, letting into the final, and then I won the final. Mary and I then won bronze in the mixed team event, and then the boys and I won gold in the team event. And it was just like boom, boom, boom. It was like whoa! It was like all this success. Like the team was feeling it. Like the Olympic team was mostly selected by then. It's like this is awesome. Um, then we moved into Junior Olympics, and my team was there. We were around having a good time, being social. And it was great. We got the chance to go and see a few of the kids make the international teams, and that was kind of a big deal. A lot of them were seniors and are going off to colleges soon, and so that was kind of like the last hurrah. And then we went to 50-meter trials, which at that point the 50-meter team was not selected. First trial was in October of 19. The team was decided in May of 2021. Um, and I didn't make the team, but I made the finals, and that was a good experience for me. Um, and then we turned around and went to Croatia 3 weeks later. That was an incredibly mid World Cup. Just shot okay, nothing really fantastic. Like it was hot, the food was great. That's about it. Like nothing really outstanding happened there. My peers had a little bit of success. Mary and I made a final again, got third, or not third, we got fourth, so we missed out on a medal opportunity to Russia. And then it was that same kind of thing. It's like I have nothing to lose. We have a couple weeks until the games. That's it. Like I have to train. I have to do all this stuff if I want to be successful. But if I don't, my life doesn't change. That's just kind of how our system works. And so next thing I know, we're training. We head to the games, and I'm doing all the right things, sticking to my plan to the most part, which included like doing like sportsman massage therapy, to seeing a sports psych, to exercise, to just hanging out in the room with my roommate. And like Nick Maurer and I are great friends. He lives here. And so he and I were roommates. And so we just kind of did most of the stuff together anyways. And so that was great. Um, we shoot the first match, and I qualified in second place. I shot a personal best by a mile in international play, and we make the final. It's like, okay, we're here to do it. and I got out in sixth place, and I felt great about it. I think I one of the kids who was watching from afar messaged me and said like, "Hey, you're the only person to like smile when I came off the line." I was like, "Yeah." It's like I was genuinely happy getting sixth place because that is just what happened. It's like I'm good. I'm good with this. And I very quickly realized that that opportunity was gone. And then all of a sudden I had a really kind of a deep slump afterwards where it's like, whoa, like this experience was great and I will cherish the experience. Um, However, I did realize what I lost and all the opportunities that were lost because of my performance. And it was a good one. And I sat there kind of looking at the rest of my destiny. And it's like I have another match in a day and a half with Mary, and she had the exact same performance, basically the exact same performance I did, where she had 1/10 lower, came in sixth place. That's it. And we kind of looked at each other and said, like, no, we're gonna do this on, whatever day that is. And that next day I was kind of freaking out, talked to a bunch of people, and I think where others struggle with building relationships with coaches because we assume that their role is to protect us from technical and physical issues, where my role with my coach Dan Durbin at the time was with the managing of me and all of me. And so when I had this moment of like, wow, I was like, this opportunity's gone, and I gained nothing. And all of a sudden, the last year, couple of years of suffering and doing all this stuff didn't mean anything. I told him that. I was like, dude, this is how I'm feeling. He's like, oh my god. It's like he held me accountable to the things that I believed in, and we had a good discussions with a couple other people who just said like, hey, like this is what you said you were going to do, and you're not acting like the way you're supposed to be. Like you said you wanted to do this. Like if we were just, we're not trying to just say do differently or do something whatever. It's like you're just not acting like Lucas should be acting. And it kind of dawned on me as like, yeah, like you're right. Like I have nothing to lose still, and I need to put my best foot forward for the mixed team match. Um, and so the next day, we show up to the range. We're doing our thing. Um, Mary kind of had a rough first round, but I had an outstanding first round, and we made it into the top eight. I think we were sixth again, where it's like we're kind of looking at each other like, okay. And those rules had a 2-round system. So the next round, she shoots a point better than me, and I'm kind of looking at her, and we finish up the match at the same time, and like we kind of look at each other and have this acknowledgement of like we just threw everything out there, and we have no idea how we did. And we didn't get a chance to say a word before I got like a tap on my shoulder from one of the range officers, like, hey, you have to go do equipment control. And I look at Mary once, and I turn around and leave. And like at this point, I'm gutted. Like I'm just exhausted. I'm emotional. I have no idea what's happening. And turn around, I see Mary and Dan embrace each other, and I'm like, so I look around for the closest results board, which is up on the like high where the fans could see it. There was no fans; it was COVID, and so I ended up like jumping on top of the guard area to like look up, and I saw United States second place, and I'm like, oh, and I look around, and it's like the team below us was in third place, and the team above us was in first place. And how like the Seuss target system, there's always like there's a line underneath if the match is still going on for them, but there's no lines. We were firmly in the gold medal match. And so like I look at her, and she can't see me because she doesn't have really good vision. So like at this point, like the range is super long, like it's 100 meters long kind of thing. And so it's like, oh my god, like I got to go and report to this random equipment control, get all my stuff set, and I come back, and we embrace each other. It's like we now it's time to go do it. And so we get ready for the match. We listen to Russia win bronze. We go in there, and we fought hard to get where we needed to be, and we just didn't shoot as well as the Chinese did, and we came in second. And is there things that I would have changed about it? I mean, I probably would have used a timeout. We didn't use a timeout, and I probably would have. Um, well, actually, it's at this point it's almost 2 years later, and it's like it's just minor nuances of stuff, but we ended up in second, and that was kind of the Olympic experience. I mean, that's kind of how that whole thing transpired.
I mean, that was the Olympic debut of that event,
Mhm.
and you got to medal. in the
Yep.
first iteration ever.
Yeah.
I mean, and you still come away like, well, this is exactly what we could have changed.
Yeah. I think that's kind of that whole like perfectionist to athlete thing, and it's like, damn, I could have like I could have done something better, but really looking at it as a whole, it's like, I mean, we went in there and we made the best decisions at the moment. Hindsight's always 2020. And at the time there was nothing better to do besides trust each other and do it. And we did. And it was such a huge success that I cherished a lot. And we I mean we did something that a lot of other Americans, have not had the chance to do. And at the end of the day, we got to contribute to USA Shooting's six medal count. I mean, we were the fourth biggest NGB. Like, if you look at track and field, swimming, wrestling, some of the other programs that have, dozens of millions of dollars in the bank all the time just to go do stuff and prepare their teams. Like USA Shooting's not exactly wealthy. And so at best, we're worth $5 million, let alone have that in the bank. And we got to accomplish so much in that year between doing the mixed team events or individually. It was such a cool experience that year.
Paris 2024.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're in the process. I actually made the Pan American team yesterday in small bore, so that was kind of cool. That's kind of where I lost.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's kind of where I lost your email because I got it and it's like, well, I was like, I'll just schedule it after the match, meaning that I was gonna look at the calendar and then do that. Instead, I just forgot, and then you messaged me. It's like, oh right, you know. Then I gotta do the thing. So yeah, that's kind of what's up.
That's incredible. What does the next year look like for you? I mean,
Um,
are we qualifying during that time? What are we scheduling?
so here's like the hard events that are happening now for me. We have World Championships, which is in 4 weeks. Um, then we have the Olympic trials at the end of September, and then what do you call it? The Pan Am Games sometime in October. And so those three events are like, yep, going to those, preparing for those matches. World Championships is just airgun, Olympic trials is both, and then Pan Am's is just small bore. And that's kind of where things are. Then we lead winter airgun. There's a couple of like tentative things out there next spring. But the goal is qualify for the Olympic team, which will be sometime in the late spring, and then we have a couple World Cups and then the actual games, and so that's what's on my mind all the time now.
Your episode, let me see when it's coming out. It should be around Olympic trials.
Okay.
I have stories to tell every week until mid-October. I mean, it's incredible, and I love every single one of you for sharing your stories with me. But that does mean that the interview that we do today on July 12th will not come out until the second week of October.
Cool. Hopefully, I predict the future well. You know.
I want that for you, you know? The exact date of your episode coming out is October 11th.
Okay, so that'll be after our first trials.
Yes.
Um, which so our trial system is kind of like a miniature ranking where we have two match competitions, three two match competitions. And so it's like whether or not the first one goes good or bad, there's still two more things to go on. And so that list will dramatically change depending on how those averages go. And so I humbly hope that I'm in a decent enough position to build off of, or, at least have a good time at Pan Am Games, one of the two.
I think it's so interesting because a lot of the athletes they end up talking to, I can almost guarantee like clockwork that we will talk about athlete identity. Who are you outside of being an athlete? And
uh,
every single thing that you have said this interview takes you away from being an athlete, from identifying as an athlete, even though you have literally represented Team USA 2 times at Olympics. And
yeah,
your mentality throughout all of this questioning has been, sure, why not? Let's do this.
yeah,
And I am I'm so interested with that perspective.
Yeah, actually, so this is going to be really funny in about 3 months whenever this episode pops up, because a lot of the kids that we're working with. So since all of this is like the whole story and TWS has grown, I have more coaches now, and this is actually something that we're addressing with the team like now. Is that this athlete identity, and like who are you and how does this impact everything else, or vice versa? And so it's like, for me, um, I I put myself as like, okay, I am the mentor. Like I am somebody who is senior on the team. I've got life experience. I've got shooting experience. I've well, I say like, oh, I've experienced it all, but I know I haven't because stuff keeps happening to me. And so, it's like I got E. coli twice in the last calendar year, from one from Egypt, one or sorry, two types from Egypt, two types from India. And it's like, oh my God, I went to the hospital before Junior Olympics, showed up 3 days into the match to coach the team and help them. And it's like, it's like I go through all this stuff, but from my perspective, is like the sport relationship with me is like, it is my career, it is my passion, it's where things lie. There's just too much other stuff though that matters more. And so when things come up, it's like, no, I just gotta take care of it. So it's there's a lot of stuff I got to balance with that, and from my end, it's like I do it because I want to. I perform and pursue this to the degree that I'm going to pursue it, and that has led me to 3 Olympic matches, one of them being a medal, and I've won a dozen international medals. I've got multiple dozen continental and national medals, titles, whatever. And I think it's because it's like, it's like it is what it is. It's gonna be whatever it's gonna be at the end of the day. My it was kind of funny because my junior year, during this whole like mesh of my brain being reformed 7 years ago, shot the GARC championships for small bore, and I shot horribly. I just didn't do all that great. And my grandfather and my uncle and my mom came out to watch me shoot, and my uncle said, like, win or lose, at the end of the day, there's literally 5 billion people who just can't care. They just have no idea. And it's like, that is true. Like life happens, And so I think where it's like, I can't get really upset about performances or really like on cloud nine about stuff, but it just doesn't matter as much as some other things that are going on. A year ago, my wife and I adopted a dog, and like that was a super cool adventure because she was abused. Like she felt horrible, like her skin and her fur was really bad, and so we nursed her back to health. And like between like my relationships with these kids and like as they get older, like they come back, and so that entire summer was super busy with people just coming in and out. We ended up putting her down in December because she threw a blood clot, and like it was all this really violent thing that was really bad. But she was old. I mean, we gave her a really good life, and so that's kind of like this life stuff that goes on where it's like there's just some stuff that just matters more. Um, and so with me on my end, it's like that's just kind of how it is. Um, and yeah, um, like for example, like we had the Pan Am selection this week. Swap blood pressure medicines. That was not a smart move. Ended up having an adverse reaction the second day of air gun. Did not have a good performance. I missed out on the Pan Am games for air gun by 2/10. Like not even points, 2/10 of a point. And got in contact with the doctor, talked to him about everything that was going on. I had an urgent care visit in between then. And we switched medicines. I put my face down range and said it's going to be what it's going to be, and I'm going to put my best foot forward. And I made the team in second place in small bore. And literally this morning, I had a surgery right here on my shoulder to get rid of some precancerous moles. And so it's like stuff just happens. Like I just got stuff going on, and that's fine. These are all things that are okay. And the whole sport thing, it's like it's a career. It's fulfilling. I'm very passionate about mentoring and competing, but life stuff just comes first with everybody, including the kids that we coach, where like, hey, we have a holistic approach about things that were going on. And when we talk about these values, we we want them to understand like, hey, sport is an outlet of your life. It's not necessarily the sole purpose. Like it is for me, but that's what it's turned into. You know, it's like that's just kind of where I've ended up. Like I didn't really plan to, when I got a sport management degree, I did not necessarily decide to build a business. You know, I pretty much got it because I was not really good at anything else at school and I wanted to shoot at school. And so that's what I ended up with. And then I took that base knowledge and I applied it to business, and we have winged it for the last 7 years, and it's great. Um, and so that's kind of it is what it is. Like I've had these plans, the plans fail or they succeed, and it's like, oh, I have to make a new plan or I have to pivot or whatever. And so that flexibility, the putting the people before the precision matters more than anything else. And so that's kind of where I'm at with this whole thing. So
How many student athletes have you provided college experiences for?
um
I read
so
at least 8.
we're up to 33 now, going to Division One schools.
Incredible update.
Yeah, yeah, we're not really good about the whole like changing our website and doing stuff like that. Like that's all work in progress. But
Well, you
it's
should. Dang, that is some misinformation.
no, it's really bad. And people always like, oh, you've only sent a few kids to college, but then they talk because like the rifle community is so small. It's like, yep, like I was on TWS for 2-3 years. Like, I worked with Lucas for 6 months, or I did this, and this, and it's like we're reorganizing all and collecting all the information and contacting the alumni to make sure that they're okay with this stuff, whatever. And it's like, yep, we have surpassed 30. Half of that came from this last year because we've got 6 coaches, and 4 of them work with rifle. And we all were sending kids over to college teams this year. It was super, super cool. And right now on the team, we've got about 40 kids, 40 kids. And so we're looking to try to expand the team a little bit more over the next few months. Um, and yeah, I mean, we're kind of in a groove, rocking and rolling right now with that.
That's incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Are you sending any of them to West Virginia?
So we have one girl on the team now who is one of ours. That's Natalie Perrin. She's there now. Oh God, she's a junior. Um, but I've only had her get enrolled to West Virginia. Um, some other schools I've got like 2 at Ohio State. Um, I got like 8 at Ole Miss. And so there's a couple just dabblings around at all these different places. I had a good chunk of them at NC State before they folded their program. Um, had one go to Alaska Fairbanks, a couple go to Kentucky, a couple go to Nebraska. We've got one that went to Air Force, and another that's now going to Navy. So yeah, we have dispersed widely.
TCU?
Yep, we got some at TCU. We have one there. We have a large recruiting class this year, and a lot of them are super interested in TCU. So well, really everybody. It's like I need to be careful what I say here because by the time like this episode plays out and colleges, are sending out their letters, they're going to listen to this and be like, hey, like, WTF. I thought you said I was the number one, whatever. And it's like, they know where I live, so they can come talk to me, and they have a roof.
I am so excited to get to tell your story. I think that what you're doing is so cool. And within the realm of Olympic development, I think that rifle is just such an interesting interview for me, from my perspective. I mean, like I was saying earlier, I mean, it's easy to interview 17 pitchers or 5 offensive linemen and get the exact same response. It's completely different when you're in an individualized sport and you're also representing Team USA. So you're not only facilitating standards that you've set for yourself, you're also working with your college standards or Team USA standards. I mean, those mental perspectives are so unique, and I love having people like you on who really break it down.
Yeah. Yeah, we I think like from my end, it's like my standards and expectations are like for the kids are the same as mine, but not necessarily with the score base. It's like, hey, you've joined TWS to be a part of a grander team. It's like, right, but we're also working out, we're being smart about training and just applying these life skills as best as we can. And so that's just kind of what the standard is. And so most of the time we're correcting character, not necessarily worry too much about the score stuff. Like our formula ends up there, but so much of the forming and the storming of our group is done, you know, dealing with their stuff. And it's like, hey, what do you believe in? It's like, oh, I believe in shooting. I was like, that doesn't mean anything. Shooting's nothing. It's a gun and a target, and you point at it with the gun. It's like that's it. But it's like, why do we shoot this, or why do we choose this sport over literally everything else? Like, there's so many options. And the kids are like, well, like I don't know. It's like it feels really good to challenge myself or to pursue things, and it ends up being this very narrowed pursuit for the individual, that our our goal as an organization is to give them the best foundation to do that pursuit, not necessarily say we're going to shoot 630s and 1180s or 590s all the time. It's like that's great if we do, because that's what our standards will lead us to. But for a lot of kids, they're just not capable of doing that. And our main perspective is like, we want you to have an excellent sport experience, to then just go off and have a good life with everything else, and to come back and contribute to the sport to make it bigger. Um, and so that's kind of the organic nature of the beast, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when you're looking at the lifespan of an athlete, you have your peak performance, and that may be 5 years, it may be 3 years. What is the lifespan of a rifle athlete?
Be a long time. Raymond Debovich from Slovakia has been competing for like 5 decades. I mean, his World Cup medals, Continental medals, Olympic medals, on the ISSF's website. I mean, it's literally like 8 or 9 pages long. I mean, that guy, like I anytime I see like juniors or whatever, I'm like, that man right there, that's the greatest shooting athlete of all time. You will kneel before him. It's like that because that's just the respect that he demands, because he's done that. And we've had a lot of other people who they shoot, they make one Olympic team, and they're like, boom, I'm good. So I think the great thing about shooting sports and rifle, it's you take it and you do whatever you want to do with it. And if you get to that point, sometimes like your body just like we have a lot of issues with shoulder and back injuries and knee surgeries and all this other kind of stuff that we deal with. But conceptually, we um we can do whatever we want. And so everyone's journey is very independent of one another. And um there's kind of like a base um understanding of like 20 years old. Like if you're not shooting at an international level by you're 20 years old, and you've been training since high school, you've been training for 15 years, you're probably not going to get there. Like that's just kind of the trends. But if you've done these things by the time you're 20 years old, there's not really a retirement age for shooting athletes. They can be competitive through all that time. I mean, I'm still shooting finals overseas with people who are in their 40s, and they're doing very well. And so it's like the time span isn't necessarily the question. It's more of like, do you get to a certain echelon by the time you're a certain age?
We only have 2 minutes left. I am out of questions for you. Before we wrap up, do you have any questions for me?
Um,
You're on the clock, 2 minutes.
um, I don't, but something that I was gonna say earlier that popped in my mind. It's like shooting. I think one of the reasons why it's so great, and why the Olympics continued this to support it through all of our like political haywire and everything. Um, the individual sports deal with people who are alone. You have to challenge your mind, body, and soul. That's what the Olympics are about. And when it comes to shooting, I don't think there's really another sport out there that is so emotionally and intrinsically challenging to oneself than shooting, because it is so easy to become world class. It is very hard to be at peace with oneself to do those things. And it's like I did it at the Olympics, and I've struggled to do it since then. And these are all just adventures that I go on to get there. And for everyone who has participated in the sport would probably agree with me. Like it's a difficult thing, but it's incredibly nurturing. And most people would walk away with a very fond experience of like, yes, this was great.
What a quote to end on.